My name's Ed Green. I'm Chief Executive of the Warwickshire Wildlife Trust, and I'm hoping that one of my colleagues can just give me a thumbs up to confirm that you can all hear what I'm saying. Marvelous. Thanks, guys. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar this evening that's going to run from 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock. It's the second in a series of webinars that we're holding as part of our Nature Recovery Fund appeal. More on that towards the end of our hour. And we're really fortunate tonight to have a couple of special external guest speakers, because we are focusing on nature-based solutions. And I think society is becoming increasingly aware that humanity faces some major problems in relation to climate change and also human health, particularly in the Western world. We are, suffering from disease and ill health, the like of which humanity has not experienced before in its history. The two are connected. Climate change is going to make human health worse, and nature-based solutions is a bit of jargon that increasingly people other than conservationists, like those of us who work for wildlife trusts, but politicians and businesses are beginning to adopt. And essentially it means, natural solutions to these type of problems. And we're going to spend a chunk of time tonight, about 40 minutes, listening to our two external speakers, Kathryn Brown and Dom Higgins, and I'll introduce them in a minute, talk about the nature of those problems and how nature-based solutions can make them better. And then we're going to hear from two speakers, people who work for the Wildlife Trust, Jake McAllister and Amanda Evans, about some of the work that the Wildlife Trust is carrying out. And then Lindsay Butler, our Director of Marketing and Fundraising, will say how this relates to the appeal. And we'll have a question and answer session, and we will take your questions and I will direct them to the speakers for the remaining time. And hopefully we'll get about 10-15 minutes for the Q&A at the end. However, please ask your questions, type them into the question box. If we don't answer anybody's questions tonight, we will get back to people within the next 2 or 3 days with a question. So let's start then, and let me just introduce our speakers. I hope my colleagues will forgive me that I'll spend a bit more time introducing our external speakers than our internal ones. Kathryn Brown is one of the UK's leading experts on climate change adaptation, and she's worked in this area for the past 18 years on a range of climate roles at the Committee on Climate Change. That's the body of independent experts that the government has set up to advise it on matters related to climate change. That committee most recently reported in June this year, and the headline was that it had found that the UK is woefully unprepared for the climate change chaos that is certainly coming in the next 30, 40, 50 years. Kathryn will tell us exactly how long. She's had various roles at the Committee on Climate Change. I won't list them all, but we're delighted within the Wildlife Trusts that she has joined us on secondment at our national office, where she is she's going to spend 6 months on secondment as our acting director for climate action. So Kathryn, welcome to the Wildlife Trust and welcome to Warwickshire tonight. Her presentation is going to be followed by one from Jake McAllister. He's one of our wetland officers, and he's going to explain some of the work that Warwickshire Wildlife Trust is already doing in this particular area. He's going to be followed by Dom Higgins, and Dom is Head of Health and Education at the Wildlife Trusts nationally. Prior to working for the Wildlife Trust, he was Director of External Affairs at the Conservation Volunteers, where he led their health and wellbeing agenda, which ultimately established their green gyms, which was one of the original green prescription options. Prior to that, he's worked in the Departments for Education and Skills and internationally in youth development and non-governmental organisations. And he's going to be followed by Amanda Evans, who's going to explain the work that Warwickshire Wildlife Trust is already doing in this area And I think that includes a short film as well. Lindsay, who some of you may be able to see on your screens, depending what viewing options you've selected. She's our Director of Marketing and Fundraising, and she will explain how this all relates to our appeal. So without further ado, welcome everybody. I see we've got 50 people on the webinar. That's fantastic. A very warm Warwickshire welcome to you all. And Kathryn, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you for that lovely introduction and such a warm welcome as well to the Wildlife Trusts. So this is day 3 in my new role on secondment, but luckily this evening I'm just going to talk you all through some of the work I've just been doing, which obviously I know a little bit more about, to lead the UK's National Climate Change Risk Assessment. So I'm just going to kick that off to give a bit of context really to the evening, and then obviously we can go through it in a bit more detail in questions. So hopefully you can see my slides, but do just shout if they disappear for any reason. So Ed has asked me to talk a little bit about nature-based solutions in a changing climate. So these slides are mainly going to be about our adaptation work in relation to climate change, but there'll be a little bit on mitigation as well. And just to set the scene, this is a typical chart that is often shown that looks like a bunch of lines on a graph, but actually gives a very stark and very worrying warning about where we're going with climate change. And these are 2 scenarios that the world could be following through the rest of the century. The scenario we want to be in is what we call the Paris aligned or the Paris Agreement scenario, which is this orangey red line along the bottom, which has an uncertainty range around it. And this is the scenario where the world is successful in reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions just after 2050. And that gives a reasonable chance of keeping global temperature rise to below 2 degrees, which is this hash line you can see along the bottom here. That's the scenario we want to get to worldwide, but that is not the scenario that we are currently on in terms of global emissions. The scenario that we're actually on, if you look at current policies and whether those are implemented, is this green scenario. And this is not a Paris-aligned scenario. This is taking us way over 2 degrees. And as you can see, by the end of the century, we can be approaching and exceeding 3 degrees and even 4 degrees of warming of global temperatures. That would have very catastrophic impacts worldwide. It's not a scenario we want to be in. A much greater risk of exceeding tipping points, a much greater risk of species extinctions globally, and very severe impacts on human health as well. So these are the 2 scenarios that we tend to look at when we're talking about climate change and climate change adaptation in particular. And what we looked at this year, and this is something that the UK has to produce every 5 years, it has to do this national risk assessment of climate change to then give government advice on what their priorities should be for adaptation going forward. And this chart just shows, which I'm sure you're all well aware, that the climate change is not a future. It is no longer a future risk. It is a current risk. The climate has changed, and we are living in a changed climate now. And you'll have seen, quite a few of the media reports over the summer that the catastrophic, dreadful flooding across Europe and Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands, the very severe heat wave conditions in North America and the wildfires that have also followed that. These stories are becoming more and more common of these unprecedented weather events. And these charts just show you an example for the UK last year. This was the 2020 heat wave in August. And these maps are just some of the maps from the Met Office that show that on 6 consecutive days last August, so a year ago, temperatures exceeded more than 10 degrees above average for that 6-day period. And we know following that event that we saw about 2,500 heat-related deaths during that heat wave, particularly people in their homes and hospitals and care homes who were not able to get away from these hot conditions. So we know that these unprecedented events and these changing events are happening now, and we need to get ready for them in human health, but also for the natural environment and across all the sectors that are affected by the weather in the UK. So what the National Risk Assessment does is it looks at 61 different risks and opportunities from climate change to the UK, which is shown on this slide here. And I appreciate the text is going to be really small here, so don't worry about trying to read this table. but I'll just talk you through what it's showing. So these are all the different risks that we look at in terms of climate change impacts for the UK. They're across a range of different sectors, and the ones that are bordered in yellow are the natural environment risks that I've pulled out in particular. And the color coding shows you the degree of urgency of additional action that's needed to address those risks over the next 5-year period. So the orangey red ones at the top, which is about half of the risks that we look at, have been given this more action needed urgency score, which means that the level of action underway in the UK to adapt to these risks is insufficient, that the risk is not going to be managed going forward. And as you can see, these ones I've pulled out at the top, there are quite a few in the natural environment that fall into that box. So things like risks to marine species and habitats from pests, pathogens, and invasive species, risks to agriculture and forestry productivity, risks to fresh water, pretty much every habitat type, every species group type is affected by climate change going forward into the future in the UK. The other colours, the yellow ones, mean that we don't have enough information yet to be able to make a sound judgment on whether additional action is needed or not. And there's also a few in there on the natural environment, things like risks to aquifers, or there are some opportunities, so opportunities for marine species, new species that are coming into UK waters. But there are very few of these risks in the green boxes where we say that the level of action that's underway currently is sufficient to manage that risk going forward. So that's effectively what the risk assessment is telling us. But it does go into more detail, obviously, on some of the aspects of risk. And this chart, again, quite a busy chart, but if you just look at the first two columns, the orangey columns, this is showing the size of the risks now and going into the future. So we use something in the risk assessment called magnitude category. So the orangey red ones, again, are high magnitude risks. So those have got annual impacts of around the hundreds of millions of pounds or more. And we can see in the present day, there's around 15, just under 15 of the risks that have that very high annual magnitude rating. Even in our 2-degree world, our Paris aligned scenario going into the future, by the 2050s, that's nearly 30. So even the point of this graph is that even in this very optimistic scenario, we know there is still going to be a significant increase in climate impacts going forward that we need to prepare for. And the other thing that we looked at is how that has changed over the last 5 years. And this chart is just showing how the urgency of action, the assessment of that has altered since the last time this assessment was done in 2017. And the thing to take away from this graph is that if you look at this more action needed category on the left-hand side, we can see there's been a big increase in the number of risks where we're saying the level of adaptation is insufficient compared to 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, it was about 35% of the risks. This time around, it's over half. So there's been a big increase in urgency in the last 5 years, which suggests that the action underway across the UK to adapt to these climate change impacts is not keeping pace with the increase in the risk that we're seeing over time. So what do we do about all of this? Well, the Climate Change Committee highlighted 8 key priority areas for urgent action for government over the next 5 years. And the thing to look at here is that 4 of these are related to the natural environment, so half of them, and they're to do with risks to terrestrial and freshwater habitats and species, risks to soil health, risks to natural carbon stores, including peatlands and woodlands, and risks to agriculture and forestry productivity effectively. The very busy barcode in the middle is just showing you how the size of the risk varies, and then some of the key policy areas that need to be addressed are on the right-hand side. And as we're also talking about health this evening as well, it's worth noting that there are health risks in here too, particularly risks to human health from overheating. And nature-based solutions, they're very good for climate change mitigation, but they're also very good for climate change adaptation. And one of those really key aspects is urban cooling. So that's also another priority area that's come out very strongly from risk assessment. And although the warnings are stark and the evidence is showing that there is a worrying trend towards a higher degree of risk, there is a lot that we can do. We just need to see a much greater scaling up of a lot of these actions that can take place. So I've highlighted obviously nature-based solutions in this chart, which comes from the risk assessment, because that's what we're talking about this evening. I know Jake's going to talk you through some really good examples of those. But there's so many things that can be done that have so many wider co-benefits, not just for nature recovery and for adaptation, but for climate mitigation and for health as well. So increasing diversity, creating new habitats, increasing carbon stores and things like blue carbon, as well as in peatlands and woodlands, and thinking about urban greening as well, and making sure that nature has a really key place in urban environments to help to address these climate challenges. Oh, sorry, it's just, there we go. There's a bit of a delay. So the other thing just to say is that we are expecting there to be winners and losers across the natural environment as the climate changes. There are certainly species who may be expanding their ranges, and I've shown, you know, a few examples on the left of this slide where from the effects of climate change alone, we might expect some of these species to be expanding their ranges if we have habitats in good condition that they can move into. Dartford warblers is actually one of the good examples we have, but we know that there are going to be habitats that are highly sensitive to a changing climate as well. And some of these are very iconic habitats for the UK, so beech woodlands, upland peat, chalk streams. Obviously, the risks from wildfire to all habitats as well are growing over time, and that's something that we want to see a lot more attention being paid to in adaptation strategies. And finally, just to finish, I just wanted to highlight as well that within the wildlife trusts and more widely as well, there's a lot of work now going on to try and measure and quantify the benefit and the contribution that nature-based solutions can make to adapting to climate change, but also locking up more carbon and contributing to mitigation. This is some work that Natural England have published earlier this year, and we've been doing something very similar in the wildlife trusts as well, to look at the contribution that different habitat types can make to climate change mitigation. And if you look at this graph on the right, these are showing the different sorts of habitats that have that effect, whether it's hedgerows, heathland, upland and lowlands, peat, salt marsh, sand dunes, etc. The thing to note here is there's quite a wide variety of measures of carbon uptake depending on the habitat type. But also these habitats are at risk from climate change. So whether it's wildfire, whether it's hotter and drier conditions that mean that active peat forming vegetation may not be able to take hold if a peatland is not in good condition, it's just an added reason why we need to make sure we're conserving these habitats, because they're going to be providing this really vital function in the future going forward. And finally, just to think about what we can do in terms of framing a bit more. So some of you may have heard of the Lawton Principles, which is the way that we've thought about marrying up nature recovery and climate change action in the past, which is about having bigger habitats, better condition, more joined up. But there's a lot of other factors that are now being thought about as well and coming into that, like having site level plans for these key hazards like fire and flood, having active management of woodlands, so we're planting suitable species, seeing really large scale restoration of different UK habitats, catchment management, and really critically, obviously, reducing other pressures on habitats and species as well, so that they are given more of a chance to adapt themselves to the changing climate. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Jake, who's going to go into a bit more detail about some of the measures in place.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kathryn. That was really interesting. 1 second, I'll just wait until my there we are. That's the start of my presentation. Yeah. So so my name is Jake McAllister. As Ed said, I'm a wetland officer at Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. And I'll be talking about some of the natural flood management works that we've been doing across Warwickshire, but primarily on upstream of Allesley, on the upper tributaries of the River Sherborne, and upstream of Forlongley, on the upper tributaries of the River Bourne. So I've been working on some of the nature reserves in that area, but also I've been working with landowners on how they manage their land and what we can do to achieve some natural flood management benefits. So yeah, I'll start off with what the environment was like in the past and how that affected flooding in that environment. So obviously, in the past, we had a predominantly pasture-based farming system, meaning that the water was more readily available to infiltrate into the soil. Rainwater was held up by that vegetation in the grasslands, so preventing it from reaching the ground, which is something that we call interception. Our streams and our rivers they had a more natural morphology, which meant they had more meanders, more bends, more curves, which ultimately means that the river was longer, which means that there's an increased time delay from water getting from those upstream headwater catchments downstream where flooding may be an issue. So floodplains, for example, were well connected and valued. These are probably the most visual of nature's flood defences, but it's not only just that store of capacity that's valuable in terms of this buffering effect that floodplains offer for flood alleviation. It's also this act of physical resistance that the vegetation on the floodplains give to floodwaters, slowing down that flow of water from upstream to downstream. We'd have had a larger network of hedgerows and generally more tree cover. So it's quite easy to imagine a thick, healthy hedgerow growing across a slope parallel to a river, and that having a meaningful impact in slowing this, the flow of water and intercepting surface water running down a hill before it gets to a watercourse. And it does have a really powerful impact. And so does the rest of the hedgerow network and tree cover in general, with their leaves and their branches intercepting rainfall and preventing it from getting to the ground again. It's been shown that trees can reduce the amount of rainfall hitting the ground beneath the tree by 25 to 45%, which is quite considerable, really, if there's a large area of tree cover. And that the root system of these hedgerows and these trees would have improved the soil structure, breaking it up and allowing water to really infiltrate into the soil and allow that soil to soak up a lot of the water rather than it sheeting across the land and ending up in those watercourses. Now, obviously, we have all of the other habitats, wetland habitats in particular, bogs, mires, fens, ponds, reed beds, that sort of thing, that generally often provide additional capacity in those flood events. Next slide, please. So what's changed? Well, it's pretty clear that from Kathryn's presentation, obviously the changing climate is a massive impact, but also our population has grown quite considerably, which has meant that land has been drained really efficiently, and we've built a lot of the times in those wetlands. This plus a general expansion of the urban environment over the past century has led to an increase in impermeable surfaces from concrete roads and tarmac to just roofs on buildings. This has directed and diverted a lot of the rainwater that would have fallen on this ground really quickly into drains, which flow quite often directly into watercourses with really little delay, which can cause these quite flashy flooding conditions. Next slide, please. So this, alongside the intensification of agriculture, this has removed a lot of trees and a lot of scrub from the environment, from the landscape, and it's opened it up. Wetlands and other difficult to work areas have been improved for agriculture, again with efficient drainage and ploughing and things like that. This has led to fields being bare quite a lot in the winter, and again this offers very little resistance to surface flows flowing across the land. But that, as well as advances in agricultural machinery, has meant that a lot of the soil and a lot of these fields are quite heavily compacted, and that reduces rather the rate of infiltration, the rate that water can soak into the ground. And on a slope, even quite a modest slope, that can encourage water to sheet across the land rather than soak into the soil, and that can lead to a lot of other problems like soil erosion, which is quite negative for river habitats in general. Next slide, please. So past river engineering strategies also they've straightened watercourses, they've removed meanders entirely, dredged and completely over-deepened these watercourses, which has disconnected them from the floodplain. So all of those positive benefits that I spoke about before, a lot of the time these rivers aren't able to access their floodplain, and that's and in some cases rather the streams have been culverted completely. So you can see that from the screen here. This is an old map of the Thames, and those big meanders that would have really slowed down the flow of water have just been cut right through. So yeah, next slide, please. So obviously these were done for seemingly good reasons at the time, either to reduce local flooding, to enable the navigation of those rivers, and to allow certain developments to go ahead. Obviously these unintended consequences, such as increasing the severity and the speed of flooding, the speed that water gets downstream, has really come to light in recent years. Next slide, please. So due to a combination of all of these factors, reducing this buffering effect that nature can have, and the effects of climate change, making high rainfall events, ones that would have typically called a 1 in 100 year event, these are becoming more common, and therefore flooding is becoming more common and more severe. Next slide, please. So why natural flood management? Obviously, we have these traditional hard engineering approaches and solutions that protect these valuable properties and homes from flooding. However, they often require quite a large area of land. They're obviously very expensive, not just to initially build and to create, but also to maintain in the future with ongoing maintenance, and therefore it's just not cost effective in a lot of locations. However, natural flood management, it's not a magic silver bullet to flooding problems of today and in the future, but it's definitely worthy of a place in this flood alleviation toolbox. It's one tool that we can use to help mitigate some of this flooding. It's very scalable. It's a lot cheaper, and it can be applied across the entire catchment from the top of the hills right down to the coast and across the entire country. It also has a litany of additional benefits as well, beyond just flood alleviation. Can improve water quality, create habitats, boost biodiversity, and particularly the soil-focused interventions can even improve agricultural yields, profits, and sustainability. Next slide, please. So what is natural flood management? There's not really a simple, universally agreed upon 1 or 2 sentence definition of what natural flood management is, because it's so diverse. But effectively, it's restoring or replicating the natural features that I spoke about earlier in a considered and targeted way to reduce or delay the maximum amount of water in a storm event arriving downstream. And we do this in four key ways, like shown on this slide. We're either slowing water down with these leaky barriers or woody debris. We're storing water in ponds and scrapes that slowly drain away. We're intercepting that rainfall with vegetation, trees, and things like that, preventing that water from initially hitting the ground. Or we're increasing soil infiltration, so getting that soil to really soak up the water rather than letting it sheet across land. Next slide, please. So this graph was really useful with engaging new landowners, and it was really good to get them to try and visualize what we were aiming to do by slowing down the flow of water, because a lot of people were a bit baffled by the idea, well, not baffled, but it was a bit of an alien concept. But now since the pandemic, almost everyone's familiar with this concept of flattening the curve. So I don't really use this too much with engaging landowners, but it really highlights what natural flood management is really about. It's about reducing that flood peak. There's a difference between flooding a garden or flooding a living room or a business. Is a lot of the time it's a matter of inches. So really just taking off this flood peak, it's really quite powerful. Next slide, please. So yeah, this graphic is still very useful. It really shows the range of interventions that are available depending on where you are, up in the headwaters or down by the coast. Just shows that when we're talking small ditches and small watercourses, these leaky barriers, these small wooden dams, permeable dams that we're creating, they're really useful up in these small watercourses. But obviously, in a bigger watercourse, they're going to get blown out, going to get broken, and not going to be as effective. Next slide, please. Yeah, unfortunately, we've not just been releasing beavers everywhere. Whilst they're amazing at creating these leaky dams, leaky barriers, they're just not so good at landowner engagement, and they cause quite a few problems in the wrong place. Yeah, maybe sometime soon, maybe in the right place. Next slide, please. So this is our best. These are our best attempts at these beaver dams, these leaky barriers. So we've been working, as I said, primarily upstream of Horsley and Coventry and upstream of Forlongley. The key points with these leaky barriers that we've been creating is we've been trying to focus on using as large material as possible. It really helps give these structures longevity and gives them a lot of security as well, prevents them from getting blown out, getting broken. And another key feature is you can notice, especially in the middle photo, we've been leaving these large gaps underneath these barriers. This not only does it help with fish migration, getting upstream and downstream, it also prevents these structures becoming active too soon. So we really want to balance them becoming active in a flood event, but not getting overwhelmed before this flood peak hits. So yeah, next slide, please. So again, these are some more photos of some more leaky barriers that we've been creating. The effects that this has on freshwater ecology and large woody debris in streams is quite phenomenal. As I would say, in that fish live in trees. These large woody structures, especially in flood events, they create, when the water cascades over the top of them, it can scour out these pools just downstream of them, which are great refuge places for fish and invertebrates. But also all of the gravel that gets eroded out and washed out gets deposited downstream, creating these shallow, fresh gravel, well-oxygenated gravel riffles that are good for spawning salmonids like brown trout. Next slide, please. So again, this is another thing that we've been creating, these storage features, temporary storage features. And again, to keep going on about this additional benefit that natural flood management has, obviously ponds are amazing for a whole range of species. And once these look quite barren at the moment. I mean, they were taken when they were just excavated, but once these are fully vegetated, they're going to be amazing habitats as well as providing this natural flood management benefits. Next slide, please. So again, infiltration and interception. We've been plugging up hedgerows across the catchment and planting these large mature trees that will grow to become standards in a field, really helping to reduce infiltration, increase infiltration, and increase interception, those sort of things. So yeah, as you can see, I mean, these benefits of restoring nature, that that's what natural flood management is really good for. If we buy new land and create new habitats in the right place, then not only can that habitat support a lot of wildlife, it can also deliver natural flood management. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. I'll hand over to Dan. To Dom, sorry.
Thank you very much for that. That was a fantastic talk, and I just, as we know, one of the 5 ways to well-being is about learning, which no doubt Amanda will get into later on. I just love attending these things. So thank you very much for having me. My name's Dom, and I'm going to talk about the need for a natural health service. But I do like to kind of kick off with a few things that nature might do for us. And I love learning these things. So fungi, I recently learned, are not plants at all, but animals, separate kingdom of life entirely. And they're made up of strands called hyphae. And I'm sure lots of you know way more about this than I. But I was learning that they're incredibly strong. They can push up through roads and create bulletproof vests, Kevlar, make super glue, and survive radiation. Apparently, they can even control the weather by sending spores high up into the air so they can trigger the formation of rain and snow. Scientists have isolated GFP, what's called a green fluorescent protein, and amongst other things, that can be used as a marker protein, very important in the medical field for diagnosing illness. If you look at the cone snail, that disarms the prey with very precise toxins, which have been cultivated into non-addictive, targeted anesthetics. And finally, I learned that the horseshoe crab, so its blue blood, has been used in medicine for years, and it ensures that anything that gets injected into our body is free of potential bacterial contamination. So the horseshoe crab, the blood was vital in developing the COVID-19 vaccine. So there are billions and billions more kind of applications, known and unknown, and the risks are kind of obvious, aren't they? If we push nature back into ever smaller pockets, we fill the seas and oceans with human-created waste and toxins, then things like the cone snail's habitat, like the coral reef, as we've heard from Kathryn earlier, warming seas leading to bleaching, you know the rest. So we must really try and align ourselves and our own well-being with the natural world. I'll credit a good friend and colleague, Dr. William Bird, with this kind of snippet. But essentially, if we take the amount of time that humans have been around, and by humans, I know our ancestors have been around for 6 million years or so, but the modern form, let's say 200,000 years. So if you take that as a 24-hour clock, okay, so with just under 2 minutes remaining of those 24 hours, the Industrial Revolution came along, particularly impactful in this country. And then with 17 seconds to go, we all move into offices and we sit down. He says, shuffling around a bit, because it's what I spend a lot of my time doing. And then with 7 seconds to go, we have the first identification of type 2 diabetes in a child, which is preventable. He takes this further, this Dr. William Bird, this theory. And basically, early humans needed 3 things. We needed place, an active environment. We lived in a pack, so we needed company. And we also needed a purpose. And if you remove any one of these things, company or having a purpose and meaning in life, or indeed having that active environment where we feel we can move around, we have chronic stress, loneliness and hostility, and lots of preventable illnesses. So we can turn it around, and that's what a natural health service is definitely a contributory part to. We are a public health service as the Wildlife Trusts, and whether we say so or not, is what we're doing. The abundance and the quality and the distribution of wildlife and wild places is reducing rapidly, as well as our personal connection to it. You would think that means we put nature first, and that governments and institutions and businesses, we act and make decisions that prioritize nature's recovery. But this does not happen, largely. Our relationship with the natural world is in trouble, and we are overseeing the destruction of a life support system. If we look at the cold, hard economics of it, we'll see that the need for healthier places has never been greater to our economy as well. 1 in 3 of us is now obese in 2020. Mental health is a public health concern before COVID, and is one of the main disease burdens worldwide. Loneliness is affecting 9 million people in the UK and growing, and undoubtedly has. And we need that natural health service that runs in every community in the UK that delivers health prevention at scale. A lot of these issues are able to be kind of prevented or slowed. This is, as I say, quite the hard economic view, and it is one way that you can make an argument. And there are those in society that we know that bear the brunt, but these people can also critically benefit the most. There's a lot of evidence about the value of greenery and wildlife and wild places to health and well-being. The Department of Health and NHS England have totally accepted this, and they've created policies that recognise it. And there's one of the more well-known studies that goes back to 2008, so it was published in The Lancet, which basically goes along the lines of, if you're rich, the greener the neighborhood where you live, the less illness you have. If you're less wealthy, you tend to experience more illness than your richer counterparts, but your health improves more than theirs with the increasing greenness of where you live. And if you're poor, of course, you suffer the poorest health of all, but critically, the greatest benefit from living somewhere green. So that's something we really need to think about when we're talking about nature's recovery. As we've heard, climate change hits people hardest too. Hits keep on coming, as we heard from Kathryn earlier. Health harm from climate change is increasing. But taking action to mitigate and, let's face it, adapt to climate change will have the additional benefit of impacting positively on mental health. So this is a diagram from the Climate Cares Coalition, which involved the Sustainable Healthcare Commission, all the healthcare professionals, the Grantham Institute within Imperial College London. And the actions, you can see there, you've got the impacts, direct and indirect, of climate change. But there are some actions that are being recommended. And one is that we incorporate the evidence of these mental health impacts that you can see on your screen of climate change into risk assessment and forecasting needs of health systems. It also means then you can build resilience into the mental health care system and be more prepared for those disruptions. It also, interestingly, recommends establishing a relationship-based approach to healthcare. So we've all heard about green prescribing and social prescribing, and a bit more of that in a moment, but taking action rather than pills, or as well as pills if they're necessary to our lives, that's really important. And I think it brings us to the importance of a closer relationship with the natural world. So if taking action is going to mitigate those mental health benefits and make us feel better about eco-anxiety, then we've got a really relevant place there to not only address climate change through nature-based solutions, but bring people into that as well. So what are we aiming for? Enough doom in the room now, there's no more. We're going to talk about some of the positive things. We need in our communities to get across the idea that there is no well-being without nature's well-being. And these are the pathways to nature connectedness. Some really exciting research that's spearheaded by University of Derby and University of Exeter, among others. Basically, by adopting these 5 into our lives, noticing the good things in nature, there are clinical improvements in mental health. And also by being better connected and having this new, closer relationship with nature, not only do we improve the well-being of both people and the natural world, it also creates a proven intention to act for nature. In other words, we become more pro-nature, we become more pro-conservation. So these are some of the things we do. Contact, which means tuning in with our senses, listening to birdsong. Emotion is about feeling alive and finding joy in wildlife at play. Beauty, of course, is about noticing nature, which could even be taking that photo of a flower, as well as visiting a place of which Warwickshire Wildlife Trust have many. Meaning is about living those meaningful and purposeful lives. So, mapping the journeys of a migratory bird absolutely works really well, or seeing that first swallow of summer or the first fall of leaves in autumn. And compassion, showing that you care. I'm here talking to you as members of a wildlife trust, but also those things about feeding birds, something really simple like that, taking part in a beach cleaning. That all helps. And this is recognised by the NHS within social prescribing. And this, if you just zone in on the middle pyramid, this basically shows that the NHS believe that a whole population, 100%, can benefit from something they're called personalised care. That basically means they look at what matters to you, not what's the matter with you, what matters to you. And then you get involved in those things that actually you enjoy and make a difference. Sounds obvious, but that's basically what green and social prescribing is. And the further you go up that pyramid, and you'll hear later on from Amanda about some of the projects that can tackle some of those kind of people with problems that people have who have longer term health conditions, 30% of the population and growing. So we're very relevant to the whole population. but also through some of those targeted projects. We have great evidence that backs up both maintaining good all-round health and tackling poor well-being are across Wildlife Trust activity. So we've got evidence that shows for every £1 that you invest in kind of regular Wildlife Trust volunteering programs, £8.50 is the social return. And then for the targeted programs, it's closer to sort of £6.88. The costs are higher involved in running targeted programs. This is independent research from Leeds Beckett's Centre for Health Promotion. And they've looked at our activities. We looked at the kind of value that we bring. During the first full coronavirus lockdown, we saw many comments on social media and in the press, didn't we, about people noticing nearby nature. Bird songs were louder, leaves were greener, everything was more noticeable in that first spring. And a survey of 1,200 people in Manchester basically said, if you can't read the figures, pretty much 100% of people said that being able to connect with nature was critical, very important. And around 2/3 valued nearby nature much more than either before the restrictions or compared to the week before. So it's really important. We know that people need nature. And we saw then from the previous kind of presentation that you take this kind of landscape scale to nature's recovery, which is absolutely fantastic. You're planning for nature's needs and we're getting this mapped system. Actually, there's also a brilliant way of having a community out approach to nature's recovery. So we know that people want doorstep nature and that people need it. So actually, a more intelligent use of mapping that is starting to be used now, where you look at where there is access, where there isn't, and that means physical barriers, but also some of those mental and social barriers. People who feel fear or feel that the space isn't there because they can't see anybody like themselves within that space, means you can start to create these heat maps of the best places to recover action, to recover nature, or indeed to take action and engage communities who might be cut off. So I'll finish with basically saying a few reasons to be cheerful. There's lots on the horizons. Planning reform, we feel we can get somewhere with clean air and access targets. We've got 2 years to prove the case for green prescribing and a whole load of stuff that's going on across the Wildlife Trusts and in Warwickshire. And then we could scale it up everywhere. And there's things like a new designation, Wild Belt, which we're really hopeful for to go through Parliament. So the potential is there for a natural health service. If we bring it back, we can transform the well-being of people, wildlife and the planet. This is very evident in what Warwickshire Wildlife Trust are doing every day. I feel Warwickshire have been a pioneer, really, of people impacts in the Wildlife Trust movement. So, Amanda, over to you to hear more about that.
Thanks, Dom. So I'm going to give a bit of a brief introduction really to the health situation here in Warwickshire and how we're providing as Warwickshire Wildlife Trust our natural health service to the communities that we serve in Warwickshire. So our patch is a diverse patch. We cover Warwickshire, Coventry and Solihull. And within Coventry city boundaries in itself, there are huge health inequalities between North and South Solihull. There is the A45, not only divides the borough, but also divides the health outcomes for the people living in the borough. And Warwickshire itself is very diverse. The South has a very high proportion of people that are socially isolated, that feel lonely on a regular basis. And the difference in the North is that there are some greater health inequalities, more issues with housing, transport, those kind of things, all of which impact people's health. So around 1 in 4 adults in Warwickshire experience mental health problems, and that has been exacerbated by the pandemic, obviously. And particularly children and young people in Warwickshire really need more help with their health, especially their mental health. Stress, social isolation, financial worries, housing, unemployment all contribute to mental health problems, which are a big concern across the whole patch. People in Coventry and Nuneaton and Bedworth tend to engage less in physical activity than in some of the other boroughs of Warwickshire, and also less than the national average. And that in itself is shown to improve mental health through improving sleep, releasing hormones, reducing stress. But the latest Joint Strategic Needs Assessment for Coventry and Warwickshire acknowledged the impact of the pandemic, but also acknowledges the importance of green spaces and the clear benefits that green spaces have on people's health. It prioritises understanding who is and isn't accessing green spaces and identifying what those barriers are and trying to overcome those barriers. It specifically highlights how attendance at parks in Warwickshire changed over the past 18 months and how that's impacted on health. So in winter 2021, less people were accessing parks. That could have been because of the weather. It could have been for other reasons, but could also be connected with the increase in poor mental health during this year's lockdown in comparison to last year's. So in Warwickshire, our health and skills team runs a range of projects, and we have specific aims for those projects and objectives in the way we deliver them. Next slide, please. So our aim within all of our health and skills projects is to reconnect people with nature through the 5 ways to wellbeing. We do add in a 6th, which is about looking after the planet. And our aim is really to build that nature connectedness that Dom talked about, to get people to really connect with nature, to understand how it's impacting their health and well-being, and then empower them to feel confident to take action for wildlife. So to go on and volunteer, or to join as a member, or to participate in other activities. And all of those things hopefully mean that people will start to value nature more, will spend more time outdoors to benefit their health and well-being, and also that people and communities will use those green spaces as a place to socialise and feel connected, not just with other people, but with the area itself. And one of the things that we really want to do is make sure that all communities have access to and use high quality green spaces close to where they live and work, and again leading to people taking action within those communities. So really it's about connecting people with themselves sometimes, other people and nature on their doorstep and in their local area. So we do this in a number of different ways. Can I have the next slide, please? So our 8-week bushcraft courses are aimed at people with more enduring mental ill health. So that's 30% probably in the middle of Dom's triangle. And they run in our woodland sites, and they are based around a campfire. It's incredible. And the difference that we see in people over that time is really life-changing for some people. We use the 5 ways to wellbeing to encourage people to connect with other people. Some of these people haven't been out of the house for over a year due to anxiety or depression. So it's a real big step to get them there. But the friendships and the relationships that form are really special and have led to people using their green spaces more. So 3 people that came on one of our first bushcraft courses regularly meet now to walk in the parks in Coventry and in other green spaces in the area. We have one young lady who was really very poorly, came with us on an 8-week bushcraft course, and at that point realised that nature was really the thing that kept her well. And she managed to return to work and now is a fantastic volunteer with us. The next kind of step of work that we do is probably with people in the whole population. So these are our 5 ways to wellbeing courses. Next slide, please. So these are aimed at people with less enduring mental ill health. So are people that may be off work for a period of time with stress. Quite often people that are retired that are finding they're feeling quite lonely without the day-to-day contact from people. Mums whose children have gone off to school and are feeling a little bit isolated now. And these are 5 to 6 week courses, and we focus on each one of those ways to wellbeing. And we do that through walking, looking at what we see, using photography. I think Dom mentioned at some point to use our macro lenses to really look closely at what we're seeing. And again, to connect with other people, but also to connect with those green spaces. So one lady that came on our first 5 Ways to Wellbeing course came to the Lem Valley Nature Reserve, and she hadn't been out for this course ran in the autumn last year, hadn't been out for 6 months during lockdown, felt very isolated, came on our course, hadn't really visited the reserve before. The following week, she brought her kids down and she was there den building with them. So really found a new green space and found kind of that connection that we really need to build so that people feel the benefit of nature to their own health. Next slide, please. We find through all of these courses that we do manage to successfully build a relationship for people with nature, and very often they are ready to give back. So one of the key things we do as part of the course is to signpost people to what they can do after. We have lots of volunteering groups. Some are just 3-hour session where the focus is kind of keeping on top of the lower level tasks on our reserves, so clearing paths and things like that, keeping them really good for people and wildlife. We have longer full day sessions depending on people's ability and the reasons people want to give back, really. So there's something for everybody, including in our visitors centres. But I think the best way for me to show you how people feel connected to nature through our courses is to show you a short film of volunteers from our Leamington's Green Connections project who are volunteering at either Lem Valley or Oakley Wood, and also some volunteers from the Environment Me project team who are volunteering on a allotment site that belongs to Coventry and Warwickshire Mind in the centre of Coventry.
Whenever you're ready.
Not doing anything yet, are we?
Yeah, so just, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, anytime you're ready now.
Okay, is it on now?
It's on there, yeah.
I can't think of the words to express how much better I feel when I come outside. It's just everything. There isn't a feeling like it, you know, to walk free in nature and to breathe fresh air.
Without that, the situation concerning my mental health condition would deteriorate rapidly, yeah?
And I love how people, the last 18 months with lockdown, meeting friends where I would have gone to their house or would have gone for a drink or have a coffee in town, and I'm saying, you know, come walk with me. And whereas before I might have been slightly embarrassed about saying, come out to nature with me, you know, of my age group and the mums, you know, and they love it, you know, having wonderful walks all around green spaces.
Well, I just found over the last few weeks, particularly because, like, with the lockdown and stuff, everyone being at home and all working away, and I'm used to being a bit more on my own, doing my own thing. That's got to me a bit. Coming out here, you just get a sense of calmness.
You know, I do a lot of watering down here, spring and the summer. It's essential, really. You know, the environment's so beautiful, like with your birds singing, and at the moment you've got blossom on the trees, and the birds are starting to open into leaves, and I find it very therapeutic. It's just a really good environment to come to, like, you know, it's like a little oasis in the city, like, you know.
And actually my kids do it now. So if I'm obviously stressed, my body language, my verbalisation, whatever, they'll all come up to me and be like, do you want to go for a walk, Mum? Just me and you. Or why don't you go outside with a cup of tea? Sit in the garden for 5 minutes, you'll feel better. Having 5 minutes with a cup of tea in the garden rather than sitting outside makes a huge difference to my world. And just stopping, and I've got a lovely bush just behind the back of my garden, and it's full of birds, and I can't name half of them, but actually listening to them and watching them go about in their busy daily lives and pausing myself and being still in that moment is so lovely. It really kind of just quietens my mind in a way that nothing else does.
I started suffering from really bad depression during the lockdown, but being able to come down here and just hearing the birds, meeting other people that are interested in nature, planting things, digging, just all these things that they really, really help. And it's just really peaceful. Like it's like being in a different world for a few hours.
Butterflies in your stomach, which I get, when you get anxiety, obviously you get that sort of feeling. You don't get that when you're out and about places like this. That disappears, which is really good.
When I come outside, it doesn't even matter about the weather, it's just being outside in nature, looking at wildlife. It's better than any antidepressants I've ever been on. It just helps my well-being, my moods. Any dark thoughts I might have makes me feel so much better.
So some really lovely, accounts, I guess, from our volunteers about what nature means to them. And we really want to be able to offer a natural health service in a much wider area, to be able to offer it to communities right on their very doorstep and help put nature into recovery. If we can acquire more land, we can run more of these opportunities, we can deliver more courses, and we can give people more opportunity to connect with nature and to experience the power of nature for their own well-being, and then to give back and help us to put nature back into recovery.
Thanks for that, Amanda. What an amazing film. Thanks for sharing that. So I'd like to talk to you about our Nature Recovery Fund appeal. So in March 2021, we launched the biggest appeal, actually, that Warwickshire Wildlife Trust has ever launched. And that appeal was so that we can start to buy the right land in the right places, so we can create habitats and reconnect people with nature at a scale that we have not done before. So the more land that we have, the better our chance is of delivering the kind of natural solutions to climate change and the health crisis that the panel have talked about today. So our aim is to double the size of the land that the Trust manages for nature conservation by 2030, it's a big ambition, and we need your help with that. So we already manage 1,000 hectares of land for nature's recovery, and we've built that up over our 50-year history, and we're incredibly proud of it. But we want to double that in just the next 10 years. And that's obviously in response to the urgency of the challenges that we face and the challenges that Kathryn and Dom particularly highlighted. So prior to our launch, we'd already secured a pretty incredible 1.5 million for our Nature Recovery Fund that we've started to build up. And that's through legacies and some generous corporate donations. And since we launched, we've also raised a further £50,000 in individual donations, which is fantastic. And we're incredibly grateful to our members and the public who have already donated. But we need your help to double that, to create a 3 million fund to buy land across Coventry and Warwickshire and Solihull. So we, and working with others, so communities, local authorities, businesses and landowners, can start to tackle the ecological, climate and health crisis and bring about nature's recovery by 2030. Next slide, please. So how can you help? So firstly, you can donate to the appeal. We'd absolutely love it if you did. You can pledge a monthly gift to the Nature Recovery Fund, or you can fundraise for us with your friends, with your family, in your community. All of that will help us immensely, and we'll send details for how to donate in a follow-up email after the webinar. You can also follow the Trust on social media and share our appeal content. So hashtags Wilder Warwickshire. The more people that hear about our ambitions for nature recovery, the better our chance of success. And again, we'll share social media details with you after the webinar in an email. But if you have a platform, if you could use your influence to talk about the appeal, that'd be amazing. You just never know who's listening and who might want to support us. Also tell your networks. You never know who you know. So there might be people in your network, such as major landowners, who would be interested in helping us achieve our ambitions for nature's recovery. So tell as many people as you can. if your company supports charities, please do put us forward. We'd be absolutely delighted to come and talk about our ambitions for nature's recovery by 2030, and to talk a little bit more about the appeal and how companies can help support us with that, whether that's through financial donations or doing more for nature on their land that they own. Many of us are part of clubs or organisations, and that's all starting to pick back up now the pandemic is, well, we're sort of back out a little bit in society. So I think if you're visiting clubs or visiting friends or going about your day-to-day life, and you'd like to invite us to give a talk on our appeal on nature-based solutions and nature's recovery, please do invite us along. That'd be fantastic. Okay, so I'd like to hand back over to Ed for questions, and thank you very much, Ed.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you all to the speakers as well. We have overrun slightly, so I'm going to, we have a few questions that have come in. We will send full replies to everybody, and if you, once you've left this webinar, as you're lying in the bath tonight, if you think of a question, please send it in and we'll answer that as well. Linda Twibble, I hope, Linda, I've pronounced your last name properly there, has asked, what benefit do the environmental allotments have? From personal experience, I know it contributes to the Natural Health Service through mental health. Well, that's a bit of a gift, that question. Thank you very much, Linda, because as you might have realised, a large part of that film that we've just seen was filmed on an allotment in Coventry that we have a long-running initiative there in partnership with Mind. So my answer to that is that allotments have an enormous benefit. Linda, we will send you more details of that project, so in the form of a more full answer to your question. A couple of questions have come in from John and Fern. One of them is quite a long question, but I'll paraphrase it. I think, John and Fern, you're saying, if we give you some money, what would you spend it on? And you've also asked that if you have a suggestion for a piece of land that could be improved for nature, who should you contact? Well, the focus of our nature recovery appeal, as Lindsay said briefly at the end, is to help the trust lead what will be an initiative that will need to involve many, many organisations across the whole of Warwickshire. We don't intend to do it all ourselves, but an initiative that will end up with more land being managed and looked after for nature. And we've set ourselves the target that Lindsay explained of doubling the trust estate in just under 10 years. So if anybody was to give us money, probably the first thing we would use it for is to buy land, but we will only buy land in the right place, at the right price as well. We're very conscious of avoiding any competition in sales of land, which means that we're not using money that's been given to us responsibly. It's difficult to know which bit of land. We've done various analyses, and John and Fern, we will send you a more full answer to explain exactly what I mean, but we've done analysis so that we have a good idea of what the right land in the right place means, and we are constantly on the outlook for opportunities. And in the last 3 weeks, we did put an offer in on a piece of land that was in exactly the right place, and that would have used a large proportion of the £1.5 million that is currently in the Nature Recovery Fund. Unfortunately, as sometimes happens, we were outbid and we were not successful in that, but we felt that we offered the right price and we weren't prepared to go any higher. If you have suggestions for bits of land, then please contact the Trust. The details are in our members magazine, or you could send an email into our sort of general inquiries email that is readily found on our website. But John and Fern, you've asked specifically, we will send you some contact details of exactly who to contact. And Gareth Wyatt has asked a question, which is, I think, will require quite a long and considered answer. He says, living in the area south of the Western Greenbelt, I've been disappointed that activity to improve habitats is not so developed as those in the north. I think, Gareth, we need to at least give you an overview of the work that we have done in the south, and indeed that other partner organisations do in the south. And that's going to take a bit more time than we have available at the moment. So we'll get back to you on that. And that's it for the questions, I think. I'm just going to check that there isn't one that I haven't noticed yet. Well, thank you, Ian, for the comment that you've just submitted. But I think we're going to wrap it up here. It's 8:10. We've taken 10 more minutes of your time, of everybody's time, than we promised. So can I just say thanks ever so much for joining this webinar. Please get in touch with us with any further questions, any thoughts that you might have after this, any suggestions. Those of you who are members, the contact details are in alongside the article on the Nature Recovery Fund in the magazine, but our website is also a very easy way of getting in touch with us. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you for organising the webinar. Philippa has been driving the technology behind the scenes. None of you have seen her. Thank you, Philippa, and good night, everybody. Have a good evening.